for joining us today for our training that we are hosting along with the New York City Campaign Finance Board on a how-to guide for candidates and donors for campaign finance. And I think, I think during this historic election cycle, there's been a really high interest among Asian Americans in how to participate in the electoral process. So we wanted to continue to raise awareness in our community about all the ways that we can ensure that our voices are present and heard throughout the civic life of our city. So we've seen the impact of Asian Americans as voters in places like Georgia during the recent presidential campaign, and also seen renewed interest among Asian New Yorkers in running for office. So certainly we're hoping that this training is timely and is going to be helpful for our community. And this is meant to be a first of several forums and trainings that addresses this increased interest in engaging in a political and civic life of our city. So please keep an eye out for additional events as we announce them. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and also sign up for our newsletter. Just let Ahmed know if you want to be part of our our communications regarding this series of trainings and forums. I also welcome any feedback on this particular event, as well as any other trainings or forum ideas that you may have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the staff from the Campaign Finance Board who will be presenting the training today. I believe Suprita Dutta from the Senior Candidates Services Liaison. I think I got your title right. That's a mouthful. From Campaign Finance will be handling the online portion, and I believe Kyle Kennedy, Candidate Services Liaison, will be answering questions in the Q&A box. So if you look at the bottom, there's also a chat function, but if you could use the Q&A button sort of on the right, bottom right, we will try to, I think Kyle will try to answer them in real time in order to save time. So we're most grateful for Campaign Finance for joining us today, and thank them for their time. And without further ado, Suprita, take it away.
Great, thank you for that. So first of all, can everyone hear me? Just, I guess Howard, you can give me a thumbs up, but if you're having any issues, feel free to pop into the Q&A or the chat and let us know there. I'll start off with a couple of quick introductory remarks. So first of all, thank you for having us. The Campaign Finance Board very much appreciates our past and ongoing relationship with the Asian American Federation. So thank you to the Executive Director, Joanne Yu, Howard, Ahmed, and the rest of the Federation staff and board for having us today. And with the 2021 citywide elections kind of on the horizon, thank you for our interest in our work, in particular, our voter education opportunities and public matching funds program, and helping us serve as ambassadors to those in your network to better understand the tools and resources that are available from us. And as we have done with other community-based organizations and leaders, we want to continue our partnership and with the Federation and its members. So we really do hope to foster kind of ongoing dialogue after today's session and ensure that those interested in running for office or those helping candidates as campaign treasurers, staff, volunteers, or fundraisers, or any other role kind of know and understand our program. I know that we have a couple of campaigns and candidates and campaign staff with us here today, so thank you for joining us as well. And lastly, just to wrap up introductions, there are a couple of folks from the Campaign Finance Board here with us today as well. So today we are joined by Hannah Edgerton, Director of Candidate Services, Kyle Kennedy, Candidate Services Liaison, who will also be assisting me in the chat today, as well as Dan Cho, Assistant Executive Director for Candidate Guidance and Policy. So we are here as a nonpartisan and confidential resource, so please don't hesitate to engage with us directly or as a group during and after today's session. Today's session is really the starting point, but we hope to be in touch with you afterwards as well. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video really quick and then share my screen so that we can get started with the presentation. All right, so everyone should be able to see the screen, see the presentation on their screen. So welcome again to the CFB's online training. As I mentioned, my name is Saprita Dada. I'm a Senior Candidate Services Liaison here at the CFB, and I will be leading our New to the CFB seminar today. So first, just a little background on this seminar. We're always trying to improve. So after every election cycle, we always survey candidates, treasurers, and campaign staff to find areas for improvement. We heard from survey respondents that they wanted additional trainings, especially for first-time candidates, and we decided to act on that feedback and create this New to the CFB seminar. So during today's session, if you have any questions, just use the Zoom feature, the Q&A feature, to submit your questions. You are also welcome to keep your cameras and microphones turned off during the duration of today's training, since we will not need those features. And then after the training, keep an eye out for a thank you email from us with links to some helpful resources that we will discuss during today's training and that you will have access to afterwards. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the CFB has traditionally offered two trainings, a compliance training and a C-SMART trainings. And both of these trainings are mandatory for each campaign running for a New York City office each election cycle. This seminar is an additional session that we are offering to provide anyone who's new to the CFB with the basics of running a campaign under New York City campaign finance regulations. Just as a quick note, this seminar is completely optional and it does not fulfill the legally mandated training requirement. So if you are running for office, someone from your campaign must still complete both the compliance and C-SMART trainings. Since the seminar is geared towards candidates and campaigns who are new to the CFB, today we'll focus on a broad overview of the CFBs and the laws it administers. The compliance and training and C-SMART trainings that I mentioned offer more detail regarding those regulations and how to comply with the law. So today, the goal of this seminar is to help put those later trainings into context and make them easier to understand. A number of you may have some questions about the particular details of some of the things we discussed today, and you might be interested in attending our compliance training that will go over those questions in more detail. This session will last about an hour and a half, and after which we will have brief sessions for Q&A, both during and after the training. If there is something that you would feel be better for an individual conversation or a conversation directly with one of our candidate services liaison, definitely feel free to reach out to the CFB directly. And with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. So the first step, as you can imagine, the first step in the election process is just deciding to run. So now we're going to go over some factors you may want to consider before you're committing to the process. So before you can even begin to make the decision to run, you need to make sure you're eligible to do so. So to run for office in New York City by election day, you must be 18 years of old, a US citizen, and also reside in the local subdivision of the office of which you're seeking election. For example, if you would like to run for city council, you need to live in the council district in which you'll be running by election day. All right. And then if you have any other questions about other qualification requirements, go ahead and contact the Board of Elections. So this would be the New York State Board of Elections, since they have jurisdiction over this particular matter. Once you have verified that you can run for office, you should consider whether you're ready to meet the demands that come with running for office. So running for office demands that you have a platform or message. You want to make sure that you understand the issues that are relevant to your community, and you have plans or proposals regarding them. Running for office is going to demand a significant amount of your time. So you want to make sure that you have a plan in place to address the challenges of balancing your campaign commitments with your other personal or career obligations. You also want to consider whether you have the support of others. You can't run an entire campaign by yourself, so you are going to need the support of both your staff and pay for its expenses. And if you think you need more time to develop a network of supporters, it may be best for you to just wait to run to make sure that you have the support you need to run for office. Running for office also means that you're answering to the public. So you must be ready for the responsibility that comes with asking to serve the public. For example, as the candidate, you will be required to disclose your personal finances. And lastly, you want to make sure you understand the legal responsibilities of your campaign. Another part of answering to the public is providing them with the information about you and your campaign that you are legally required to disclose. Today, we'll focus on the financial responsibilities of your campaign, but know that there are others as well. And so lastly, to kind of wrap up this slide, I'll say that this slide is not meant to discourage potential candidates. Rather, it is here to help you make sure that you are prepared to run a successful campaign. Great, so there are many offices you could potentially run for, such as judge, district leader, district attorney, state assembly, or Senate, or Congress. These, however, are not CFB covered offices, meaning we do not have jurisdiction over these offices. The offices which are covered by the CFB are the New York City municipal offices of City Council, Borough President, Comptroller, Public Advocate, and Mayor. One note is that the 5 different New York City municipal offices have different CFB limits and requirements. So when you attend the compliance and C-SMART trainings, you will learn more about these limits. So we're going to move on to our next section of the training. Are there any questions before we move on? I'm going to take a quick pause to look at the chat. Okay. Great. So we have one question. How do you classify where somebody lives? Is it based on where they are registered to vote, i.e. if your mailing address is somewhere else, but you changed your election address? So my first answer to this will be definitely check with the state BOE, but by election day, it will be dependent on your residential address. However, definitely this is a question that you want to check with the New York State Board of Elections. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next portion of our training. Okay, great. So now that you've decided to run and you've thoroughly considered this, it's time for your next step. So what do you do now? So first, an election cycle, we're going to go ahead and review the different types of election cycles. So an election cycle refers to the period between election day, and everyone is running in the 2021 election cycle, but may only appear in at least one election. So here's why. Before you can answer the question of which elections you will be in, you must decide if you'll be running under an established political affiliation. And if so, and if you face opposition for your office within your party, then you'll need to take part in your party's primary. In a primary, voters from within your party choose the party's candidate for each office in the general election. The primary election occurs in June of the election year. If you do not wish to run under an established party affiliation, you have the option of running in the general election in November. In the general election, voters of all or no party affiliation choose from primary winners and independent candidates. When there are special circumstances, we have what we call special elections. So special elections occur to fill a vacancy in office after an elected official's death, resignation, or removal from office occurs. So most recently, we had a number of special elections, and we are currently in a couple of special elections for city council districts as well. So today we will only discuss primary and general elections. Special elections have specific campaign finance requirements and separate deadlines, which we would help you with in the event of a special election. We also have separate trainings for special elections that occur during the election cycle. There are multiple government agencies that you will work with over the course of your campaign. So first is a federal agency, the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS. As we'll explain in a little bit, one of your campaign's first step is with the IRS. Running a campaign is kind of like running a small business because your committee will be raising and spending money and you may also pay employees like a business does, and your campaign may also face tax implications. So you should consult with the IRS to find out which federal tax and employment policies may apply to your campaign. Just as you should consult the IRS regarding federal tax regulations, you should also consult the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, as well as the New York State Department of Labor, to find out which state tax and employment policies may apply to your campaign. And lastly, there are some city agencies you will need to be in contact with, such as the New York City Board of Elections, regarding petitioning and making it onto the ballot. And in order to run for city office, as I mentioned, the candidate will also need to disclose their personal finances to the Conflicts of Interest Board, or the COIB. And lastly, you should also consult the Department of Sanitation's rules regarding sign postages and littering to avoid facing fines for posting, hanging, or distributing campaign signs and flyers illegally. And finally, and although I'm biased, most importantly, there is us, right? The New York City Campaign Finance Board. So regarding these other agencies, we try to make it easy for you to remember when you need to refer to their requirements and policies. However, we will always refer you to their offices when you have specific questions regarding their procedures. So far, we've spoken in more general campaign terms, and now let's go ahead and meet the CFB. You'll learn about the CFB's campaign finance program, as well as the rest of our mission. So first, I want to start off with a brief history of the CFB. So in response to corruption scandals in the mid-1980s, a series of ethic reforms were enacted. Most notable of these was the 1988 Campaign Finance Act. The act adopted the campaign finance program, which provides public financing for campaigns. That same year, the Campaign Finance Board was created to administer this program. So we are an independent and nonpartisan city agency created through a voter-approved referendum in 1988. We administer the New York City Campaign Finance Act and the Campaign Finance Program, more commonly known as the Matching Funds Program. And lastly, the CFB and program are funded completely and exclusively by New York City taxpayer dollars. So part of our job is to monitor and enforce candidate compliance with the Act and CFB rules. We are also here, however, to assist you as candidates and campaign staff to understand the Act and rules and help give you the kind of tools, knowledge, and skills and resources you need to successfully comply with our rules and regulations. All right. So next, we're going to go ahead and review our mission. So our mission is comprised of several different mandates. So first, we aim to increase voter engagement and awareness. We aim to reduce the barriers to running for city office. We also look to diminish the corrupting influence of money in city elections, enhance the roles of small contributors in funding campaigns, and inform the public about candidate and elections. So I know that this sounds like a lot. You might be wondering, well, how do we do it all? So first, to increase voter engagement and awareness, the CFB prints and produces the voter guide and video voter guide, which help provide voters with the information they need to make informed decisions at the polls. So if you've ever received a voter guide in the mail, we are the agency responsible for producing content for that. In order to diminish the corrupting influence of money in election, the CFB conducts both pre- and post-election audits of campaigns. And this information is often also available on our website as well. In addition to this audits, campaign finance information is disclosed to the public. So CFB publishes and provides the information for every campaign in every election cycle online through the Follow the Money database, the campaign finance summaries, and the post-election report. And finally, to reduce the barriers to running for office, while also simultaneously enhancing the role of small contributors, we oversee the campaign finance program, which I mentioned before, also known as the Matching Funds Program. And before we discuss this program in detail, I want to go over a few recent regulatory changes. As you can imagine, there have been some updates to the program since 1988. So most recently in November 2018, New York City voters approved a ballot referendum recommended by a charter revision commission that made substantial changes to the city's campaign finance system. These included increasing the amount of public funding in elections by raising the matching rate and maximum payments, making public funds available earlier than the election year for those campaigns that qualify, and in return for these benefits, lowering the contribution limits. And here I want to make a quick note that for the 2021 election cycle only, campaigns will have the option to participate in the new program or the old one. And while today's training will be geared towards the new program, we will continue to provide guidance on the old program. So if you have any questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us afterwards. You can also find more information on the changes on our website. And with that, I'm going to take a quick pause. Are there any questions before we delve into the campaign finance program? All right. Seems like we're all set. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section where we'll discuss the campaign finance program. So the goal of the program is to enable more citizens to run for office and magnify the voices of ordinary New Yorkers in the election process. And to accomplish this goal, the program distributes public funds to match and multiply small dollar contributions from individual New York City residents. Excuse me, the program has several unique benefits that candidates can take advantage of, such as receiving $8 in matching funds for every $1 contributed by an individual New York City resident. So for city council and borough president races, a maximum of $175 can be matched per eligible contributor, and up to $250 can be matched for citywide candidates at a matching rate of $8 to 1. Next, participation in the campaign finance program also allows you to spend less time raising money and more time with voters and your platform, and which also enables you to run a competitive campaign regardless of personal finances, reduce the influence of special interests and lobbying groups, and also sends a positive sign to voters by agreeing to spending limits. If you do choose to join the program, we will consider you to be a participant. You'll be known as a program participant. If you choose not to participate in the program, we'll refer to you as a non-participant. Candidates who are non-participants do not have a limit on how much they can give to their own campaign, nor do they have spending limits. And regardless of participation status, all campaigns must abide by contribution limits, register with the CFB, and provide comprehensive disclosure of the campaign's financial activity. And disclosure is just one of the compliance responsibilities campaign must follow to receive funds. There are several other mandated responsibilities to consider, which I will now outline for you. So all participants in the program must abide by campaign contribution and spending limits. So contribution limits apply to all contributors. There are also limits to how much a participating candidate can contribute to his or her own campaign. Non-participants don't have a limit to how much they can give to their own campaign, and nor do they have spending limits. And there are separate out-year primary and general spending limits applicable to participating candidates. If you have any questions about these different spending limits, definitely feel free to visit our website or attend one of our compliance trainings. There's also a two-part threshold participants must meet in order to receive public funds. So candidates must receive a certain dollar amount of contributions and a certain number of contributions from city residents. These thresholds ensure that participants receiving taxpayer dollars have a minimum level of community support. And in order to meet the threshold, candidate must collect, document, and claim these contributions for match. Furthermore, all campaigns must document expenditures and demonstrate that public funds were spent to further the candidate's nomination and election to office. And otherwise, the public funds must be repaid. So you want to make sure that if you are receiving taxpayer dollars, you're spending them in a way that furthers your own election to office. All of these compliance requirements are detailed in the Campaign Finance Book Handbook and will be fully laid out in the compliance training. So if you file a certification form by April 26, 2021, have been abiding by eligibility requirements, and have not been cited for non-payment violations, your campaign may receive public funds payments. You may be eligible for public funds payments as early as the December before the election year, so plan to certify early if you are seeking an early payment. So I will note, as we mentioned, one of the recent legislative updates made public funds as available as early as the year before the election. So our first early public funds payment is upcoming in mid-December. However, we also have additional early public funds payments in early 2021, and then continuing throughout the election cycle as well. Public funds are dispersed, as I mentioned, according to a public funds payment schedule set by the CFB in advance. Those that have met all the legal requirements for receiving public funds will receive them by direct deposit on the dates established by the public funds disbursement schedule. Remember that this is direct deposit into your committee account, not a personal account. So public funds payments do not go directly to paying bills or to vendors. Your campaign chooses how to spend the public funds from the committee account as your campaign sees fit, and of course, within the CFB guidelines. And to reiterate, public funds are never guaranteed. They're never a definite. So as you are planning your campaign, this is something you always want to keep at the back of your mind. So we're going to go ahead and insert the campaign finance program into the election cycle timeline. We're going to go ahead and look at the timeline of an election cycle and how the campaign finance program and your participation fits in. So an election cycle is a term we use to describe the entire 4 years between each election. So this timeline will give you an overview of the program if you wish to become a participant. So beginning in the out year periods, these are the 3 years preceding the year of the election. And we're quickly coming to the close of the out year period. So during the out year period, you should submit a certification designating you as a participant in the program. You will then collect and claim contributions for a match. And as you do so, you can begin making progress towards reaching those 2 threshold requirements. The earliest you could receive a payment is the December before the election year. So this December, only if you qualify. And if you are seeking the earliest public funds payment, you must submit your certification by the November before the election. You will also need to abide by the out year spending limits. During the election year and up to the year of the election up to election day, again, you must officially join the program by submitting a certification by April 26th of the election year. That's the absolute last day to join the matching funds program. You will continue to collect and claim contributions for match and reach threshold if you have not done so already during the out year period. I will note that multiple public funds payments will be made during the election year to campaigns that qualify, as I mentioned previously, and you will attempt to get on the primary and or general ballots. And all participants, whether they receive public funds or not, must continue to abide by the primary or general election spending limits. After the election passes, so after election day, we begin what we call the post-election period. So during the post-election period, participants must demonstrate compliance with the laws and rules of the program through the CFB's audit process. The length of the post-election period really does vary for different campaigns, depending on their audits, their responsiveness, and other factors. So, we've gone over deciding to run, and we've briefly gone over the CFB and program background information. Are there any questions on the previous sections before we move forward? Great, I see that Kyle is doing a great job answering these questions, so thank you. I want to see if just going to give a couple of more seconds to see if there are any questions, but it looks like we're doing good on time for the most part. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and dive into the next section, opening your committee. So now it's time to take your first administrative steps to beginning your campaign. You've decided to run, you've taken all the things into consideration, you've looked at your eligibility requirements, and you're saying, yes, we're ready to go ahead and get started. So the first thing to do is actually, as we see on screen, opening your committee. But before we go any further, we're briefly going to discuss some important terms we use at the CFB and how they relate to you and your campaign. So some common terms. First is candidate, is probably the most commonly known term. A candidate is the person who is seeking their own election to office. Next, we have committee, which is a legal entity formed by a candidate through which all campaign money is raised and spent. A bank account must be opened in the name of your committee. All contributions must be made to the committee, and all bills must be paid by the committee. So note that there is no personal account that is available here. All bank transactions must happen through the bank account that's opened in the name of your committee. Lastly, every candidate must select a treasurer for the committee. A treasurer is accountable for the campaign's financial compliance and reporting with the CFB, and it's imperative that this person be responsible because both the candidate and treasurer will be personally and legally liable for any penalties that may be assessed against the campaign. And it is permissible for the candidate to also be the treasurer, but we don't recommend this just because of the time each role consumes. Again, you really should be thinking of your committee as a small business because you will have employees, expenses, and money coming in and going out of your committee bank account. And just as you need to follow appropriate legal procedures when opening a business or business account, you need to follow the legal procedures for opening your candidates committee. As I mentioned at the beginning of the seminar, there are multiple steps for you that you will take in order to start your campaign. So the first, as I mentioned, is obtaining an employer identification number or an EIN from the IRS, right? Again, going back to the federal agencies that you'll be involved with, the IRS is the main one, and you can obtain this EIN number online at irs.gov. Second, you need to open a bank account in the name of your new committee. So you must ensure that the bank provides itemized deposit slips and the front and back of all canceled committee checks. These are some of the types of documentation that we will request from your campaigns. Some banks do charge extra fees for these services and some do not. So you may want to look into your bank's policies before opening your committee's bank account with them. And finally, you'll also want to obtain a committee debit card. A committee debit card is the most convenient way for your committee to document purchases, so we recommend you use one to pay for as many committee bills as possible. Third, after you've obtained your EIN number, and if you have opened your bank account in the name of your new committee, you will then register with the CFB by submitting a certification or file a registration to the CFB. Note, only one of these forms need to be submitted. So if you're going to participate in the campaign finance program, then go ahead and give us a certification. These forms are both available on our website. The form must be filled out, signed, dated, notarized, and then emailed to us. Since we are all working remotely, we are accepting registrations via email. However, if you are we are accepting registrations by email. However, we will request the original hard copy of the form at a later date for you to mail to us to our offices so that we have the original registration from your campaign. One other quick thing I want to note, in the event that your campaign's bank, the bank that you choose to open your committee account with, does not allow you to open an account until you are registered with the CFB, you can still go ahead and submit either the certification or file a registration to us. In the event that that happens, you can leave the bank account section blank. Once we process your registration, we will provide you with an official letter indicating that you are now registered with the Campaign Finance Board, and you can take that letter and then go to your bank and use that to open your bank account. You will then need to give us your bank account information, once you have opened it, and we will request that information after you've registered with us at the Campaign Finance Board. And as I mentioned, once you have filled out that form, once you've signed it, notarized it, go ahead and submit it to us via email. And then after we indicate that it is ready to be processed, we will also request a hard copy at a later date. Once you do register with the CFB, the next step is to attend CFB training. So as previously mentioned, the candidate, the treasurer, and or campaign manager for your campaign is legally required to take both the compliance and C-SMART trainings at some point during the election cycle. And the sooner you can do so, the better, just because a more organized, a more knowledgeable staff will help you remain in compliance with our rules and regulations. You will continue to build out your campaign staff and assign duties and responsibilities. So everyone on your campaign should know what their role and responsibilities are. You and your employees should also familiarize yourself with the different resources that the CFB offers. So again, throughout this training, I will refer to the Campaign Finance Handbook, which contains compliance details and is available in PDF format on our website. We'll also send a link to the Campaign Finance Handbook, as well as to other CFB resources after today's training in our thank you email. Next, you should begin organizing files using CFB labels that will correspond to the type of documentation that we will collect from your campaign. So it's important that you get organized right at the beginning of your campaign so that these different types of documentation are easily available and accessible to you throughout the election cycle, and definitely during the post-election audit process when we do a more thorough request of all of your documentation. And lastly, you want to go ahead and make sure that you are in touch with candidate services. So your candidate services liaison will contact your campaign via email and send your campaign a welcome email once you complete your registration with the CFB. I may be somewhat biased, but I think the candidate services liaison are your best resources here at the Campaign Finance Board. We're here to answer your questions. We are available by email as well as calls by appointment, since we are all working remotely at this time. Anytime you have a question regarding a transaction, I always recommend reaching out to your candidate services liaison in advance of making that transaction, just because it's always easier to triage something on our end before that transaction has gone through. When you first register with the Campaign Finance Board, that is also a good time to familiarize and introduce yourself to your candidate services liaison and ask any getting started questions that you may have at the beginning of your campaign. And at this point, you would be ready to begin running your campaign. So now we're going to go over some general aspects of campaign planning that may influence campaign finance compliance decisions you'll have to make later on. So before I do that, I'm going to have a quick pause to see if we have any questions at this time. Great, okay. It seems like we're all good to go. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the things that you want to consider as you are running your campaign. So before you begin campaigning, like any good business, you should have a plan, right? Just as a small business operates on a business model, a campaign should follow a campaign plan. So here are some elements you will want to consider as you are developing your campaign plan. So create a campaign budget that will enable you to achieve your goals. You should estimate the amount of funds you anticipate raising and spending for your campaign, project how much you would need to raise in order to meet the two-part threshold to be eligible for public funds. And from there, you can set fundraising goals and benchmarks and plan your calendars as well. You should also think about campaign staff. You will already have a treasurer, but who else might you need to run a successful campaign? Brainstorm all the tasks that need to be completed throughout the election cycle. And from there, you can divide those tasks into categories and job positions. For example, press or public relations tasks, fundraising tasks, or petitioning and other tasks related to making the ballot. What job positions do you need? When do you need them? And what qualifications should a person have to fill them? So these are things that you should be thinking about as you are inviting and welcoming people into your campaign. Next, political strategy. You are running for a political office, so your campaign plan will need to include actual campaigning. What is your platform, and how are you going to communicate that message, and how are you going to address your opponents? And lastly, you should establish a timeline for when components of your plans need to occur, such as meeting threshold if you participate in the program, or petitioning to get onto the ballot. Here, you'll need to ensure that you are keeping track of deadlines as well, and making sure that important dates are clearly marked. If you feel like you need assistance in creating your campaign plan, you may want to seek out the advice of those veteran candidates, treasurers, or other campaign staff members who have experience with successful campaigns. You may want to ask yourself whether you think you may need additional professional assistance, for example, legal assistance or professional consulting advice as well. So next, let's delve into creating a budget. So we here at the CFB, we cannot tell you what your campaign budget should look like. We can offer a few pointers to consider when you are creating your own budget. So if you think you may join the campaign finance program, we recommend you create a budget that allows you to run a successful campaign with or without public funds. As I mentioned, public funds are never guaranteed, so your committee should not spend more money than your committee raises. You should also keep spending limits in mind when creating your budget, and include a spending cushion for any unanticipated expenses. So you should only commit to spending funds that are already in your account, and avoid incurring additional debt. Public funds, as I mentioned, can only be used to pay for election year spending. So any spending during the out years will have to come from your committee's private contribution funds. Although we cannot tell you how much you should raise or what to spend, you can utilize several of the resources on our website, such as the Follow the Money database and the campaign finance summaries, as a reference to assist in drafting your budget. Both of these online resources contain disclosure of all contributions and expenditures of past and current CFB campaigns. And since you can sort and filter by candidate, office and election cycle, take the time to review the details of funds raised and spent by others' campaigns as an example, and as a guideline for your own campaign when you are creating a budget. As the election cycle progresses and your campaign's needs changes, you should reevaluate your campaign's budget. You must decide whether or not to join the program, as I mentioned, by April 26, 2021. If you are seeking the first early public funds payment in December of 2020, you should submit you should have submitted a certification this past July. If you choose to certify into the program, you should then reevaluate your budget based on whether you are on track to meet the two-part threshold to be eligible for public funds payments. Right? You should also estimate the amount of public funds you anticipate receiving based on how many matching claims you have probably filed. So a valid matching claim must come from an individual New York City resident and will be accompanied by the appropriate backup documentation, such as a contribution card. The compliance training will give you more information on how to obtain matchable contributions and the types of documentation you will need in order for them to be valid. As a participant, you also need to ensure your budget is within the applicable expenditure limits, depending on if you're in the out year period, the election year, or in the post-election period. So it's important to remember that public funds are not guaranteed, so budget appropriately and as outlined by the applicable expenditure limit. So what this means is do not incur expenses that you do not have the funds on hand to cover. You also want to consider the likelihood of participation in a primary and or general election, as the disbursement of public funds is dependent on this, and prepare your budget for such scenarios, right? And make sure, again, this is where that timeline comes into effect as you are planning your budget. You'll also want to consider the following in advance of hiring any employees, because they're important for both budgeting purposes and for compliance requirement. As part of your campaign budget, establish if or how much you are able to pay employees. Will you have volunteers, paid staff, or a combination of both? Make this distinction from the start of a person's time with the campaign. Also, decide the number of volunteers and employees you anticipate requiring at different points in the campaign. You might find that you may need more employees as you head into the election year. You should also assess and determine work expectations, so figuring out which employees you will require on a full-time, weekly, or daily basis. And to comply with the act, you will have to document payments made to employees and consultants by having contracts and or timesheets. So contracts must be signed prior to the date of when the employee starts work. So contracts should not be backdated for any reasons. We also have sample contracts and timesheet templates that can be found in the consultant and vendor guide section of our website that you can use as a guide when you are creating contracts and timesheets. Next, I want to focus on establishing internal controls. Personally, I think this is one of the most important aspects of your campaign. So as you find campaign staff and your campaign becomes active, it will be helpful to your campaign to establish a system of internal control. So what this means is an internal control is a process to help an organization operate effectively and efficiently in order to comply with laws and regulations and to protect the organization's assets. So we'll just go over some of the many internal controls you may choose to implement. The controls should be clearly established and understood by your employees so that they can be effectively implemented throughout the election cycle. In addition to your campaign's job descriptions, you should be assigning different tasks to employees and establish who will perform these various tasks. So on screen are a number of various tasks that will have to be completed for your campaign. Establishing a system of checks and balances can help the campaign find and correct mistakes before they're known to the CFB. So for example, the person who performs monthly account reconciliations should not be allowed to authorize payments and issue checks, should not be depositing checks, and should not be entering data into CSmart. The reason for this is you want the person who's performing these monthly account reconciliations to act as a check on these various tasks that are ideally being completed by someone else. And for more internal control advice, you should read Chapter 10 of the Campaign Finance Handbook, which is on our website. I will say that Chapter 10 of the handbook is what I think one of the most important sections of the handbook. It's definitely in my top 2. So definitely make sure that you review Chapter 10 of the Campaign Finance Handbook before you start your campaign. So within your broader campaign model, you should also include a plan for making the ballot. The process of making the ballot occurs in the spring of the election year. So to be on the ballot, you must circulate ballot petitions. So depending on your office, you must receive a certain number of signatures in order to make the ballot. If you are running under one of the political party affiliations recognized in New York, you will circulate a designating petition around February through April. Okay, and on screen, you'll see a number of the party affiliations in New York. If you choose not to run affiliated with any one of those parties, then you may run as an independent candidate. In that case, you will circulate an independent nominating petition around April and May. And for all information about making the ballot, you should refer to the New York City Board of Election, which oversees the process. The New York City Board of Election, not the CFB, is the agency that oversees the petitioning requirements and deadlines. So you will need to contact the New York City BOE for all information about making the ballot. Just note that this is not something that we have jurisdiction over. So if you decide to ask us for information about ballot petitions, we will direct you to the New York City BOE. Great, so before we move forward, does anyone have any questions? At this point, you've decided to run, you've opened your committee, and you're developing a campaign plan and budget. So are there any questions about any of that? Great, I see some great questions in the Q&A. I know that Kyle is answering them. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and move forward into the next section. So at this point, it's time to discuss how your committee will raise and spend money. So you cannot run a campaign without raising money, right? Even if you plan on joining the program to help finance your campaign, public funds can only serve as one piece of your campaign's funding. So how do committees fundraise? So one option is, of course, campaign-sponsored events. These are also known as fundraisers and could be dinners, parties, or another gathering, socially distanced at this point, in which supporters contribute money to your committee to attend or participate in the event. Another option is house parties. House parties occur when a supporter hosts a small gathering on their own in a supporter's own home to raise awareness and funds for you and your committee. At this time, again, this might not be the optimal way of raising funds, but this is an option that is available to all campaigns. Campaigns can also hold meet and greets in the community to meet voters and encourage them to contribute. Your campaign can send mailings to ask for contributions to your committee. These mailings could be actual letters or emails to potential donors. Most committees also set up a committee website or utilize social media platforms where those interested can donate online and learn more about future events. This has been a more popular, I will say, a more popular fundraising strategy within the last couple of months. And then through these events, word of mouth, and successful mobilization of your employees and resources, you can also create a donor database to build upon and continue to reach out to over the course of the election cycle. All right, so some campaigns choose to purchase donor databases from consultants or other political groups. This isn't mandatory by any means, but it is a fundraising strategy available to you should you wish to use it. You should also account for any potential costs associated with obtaining donor databases in your budget. And whenever you're developing and organizing fundraisers, it's always a good time to check in with your candidate services liaison to make sure that your fundraiser will be in compliance, and refer to Chapter 2 of the handbook for more information. We always recommend that before you host your first fundraiser, that you reach out to your candidate services liaison to ensure that you're collecting all of the required and relevant information. So contribution is any deposit of money or anything of value made in support of your campaign. So today we're just going to go over some general contribution terms and practices. Remember that in the compliance training, you will be going over the details related to accepting contribution. So first, there are different types of contributions. You can accept a monetary contribution, which could come in the form of a credit card, a check, money orders, or cash. Upon registering with the CFB, you can also sign up for NYC Votes Contribute, which is the CFB's online credit card processing platform. And we'll talk more about NYC Votes Contribute on the next slide. You may also accept an in-kind contribution, which would be in the form of a good or service or discount. So for example, a supporter donates a used laptop to your committee for use in your campaign's office, would be an example of an in-kind contribution. Campaigns must disclose and document every dollar coming in and out of their committee's bank account. Documentation is what demonstrates the validity of your committee's transactions. Documents such as bank statements, invoices, timesheets, or deposit slip prove the accuracy of what is being disclosed to the public. An important documentation term to know is the contribution card. So for most contributions you receive, you will also collect a contribution card completed and signed by an individual contributor to verify information about themselves and the contribution. And I will note that in our handbook, as well as in the compliance training, we go in depth in reviewing exactly what a contribution card looks like and what are the different types of documentation requirements for each type of contribution. So next, let's talk about NYC Votes Contribute. So NYC Votes Contribute is a fundraising platform created by the CFB for candidates. We refer to it simply as Contribute. As soon as you register with the CFB, you can sign up for Contribute. Here's how it works. The campaign will create fundraising events and receive credit card contributions online via Contribute. Stripe is the credit card processor used by Contribute, which processes the transaction and determines if the contribution is okay to clear with the bank. And then lastly, the contributions are delivered to the committee bank account. After the first contribution, deposits will be made to the campaign's account approximately every 2 days. So it's a pretty instantaneous process. There are several key benefits and advantages to using Contribute. Contribute simplifies the process of collecting credit card contributions online and allows for the upload of contribution data, Stripe fees, and events directly to CSmart. And I want to stress this because if you were using any other credit card processing platform, which you are welcome to do so, but you would have to manually enter all of the contribution data, any processing fees, and any event details into CSmart. Whereas with Contribute, you can essentially upload all of this information with the click of a button. Contribute also allows you to create, share, and manage unique pages using the fundraising events feature at your campaign-sponsored events. So there is a fundraising events features for all of for either your in-person or your online fundraisers. Supporters can also easily contribute directly from nycvotes.org. You can share this tool on all of your social media, on any email blast that you're sending out, and you can also include this on your websites as well. I will say that NYC Votes Contribute is a very popular tool amongst our CFB campaign. So definitely, once you register with us, feel free to sign up for NYC Votes Contribute and look at our NYC Votes Contribute user guide for more information on this platform. All right. So there are also different, so as we saw, there are different types of contributions, but there are also different types of contributors. So campaigns can only accept contributions from individuals, registered political committees, meaning they're registered with the CFB, or unions. Contributions from corporations, partnerships, and LLCs are always prohibited. So anything with a corp, a co, LLC, LLP next to its name is a prohibited source of contributions. Next, I want to talk quickly about the basics of expenditures. So expenditures are also known as bills, bill payments, or disbursements. They are any payments or liabilities you make to further your campaign and your own election to office. Your committee funds can only be used to pay for campaign-related expenditures. Okay, so expenditures to further your candidate's nomination or election to office can include postage for campaign literature or fundraising costs. Committee funds cannot be used for non-campaign related expenditures, such as personal costs, such as candidates' clothes or residential living costs. So you cannot use campaign funds for personal use, for personal expenses. And remember, program participants must abide by the spending limit. Make sure that you are keeping track of the spending limit, depending on which part of the election cycle you are in. You also want to ensure that for each campaign-related expenditure that you make, you're collecting and keeping the right type of documentation. So this includes bills, invoices, or timesheets. And there are different ways to pay for your campaign's bills and expenses. So we always advise using a committee debit card as often as possible. Again, make sure that when you're signing up for or you're opening your committee's bank account, that you are able to obtain a debit card. As second choice, we recommend using a committee check. Each method has slightly different requirements for documenting compliance, which you will learn more about in the compliance training. You're also welcome to use electronic funds transfer, but you should reach out to your candidate services liaison before issuing any payments using EFT so that you are aware of the documentation requirements. And again, for more information on expenditures, documentation requirements, types of expenditures, what you can and cannot spend campaign funds on, review Chapter 3 of the handbook for more information. If you ever have questions about whether you can spend campaign funds on something, reach out to your candidate services liaison before you make that transaction. Great. So you've all been raising money and making expenditures, and now we're going to go ahead and discuss disclosure, or what all campaigns must do with all the transaction data that you've been so carefully entering into CSmart and all the documents that you've been diligently labeling and filing. So disclosure of the campaign's financial activity primarily happens through a series of audits. So during a pre-election audit, you will file disclosure statements, which is a report prepared and submitted by your campaign using CSmart. Sorry about that. So this statement contains all of the information about your committee's financial transactions entered into CSmart over the disclosure period. The disclosure deadline calendar can be found under the Candidate Services tab on the CFB website. I highly encourage that this is a calendar that you print out, that you keep track of. You enter these dates into your own personal calendars. We do send out reminders prior to each disclosure statement deadline. However, it is upon the campaign to make sure that you are filing by the deadline. I will note that there are no extensions available for disclosure statement deadlines. So make sure that you are keeping track of this calendar throughout the election cycle. If you are a participant, you must also submit backup documentation with each disclosure statement. So backup documentation specifically validates any monetary contributions that are claimed for matching funds in that disclosure period. And every campaign must file with the CFB each disclosure period. So if you are registered with us, you must file with us for each disclosure period. As campaigns approach election day, so during the election year, there are many more disclosure statements that are required. So you want to do your best to continually enter your committee's financial transactions to avoid any errors in your reporting. After each disclosure statement is filed, your campaign will receive a statement review from the CFB, notifying your campaign of any misinformation or findings of non-compliance in your statement. Statement reviews give you the opportunity to respond to these findings promptly during the election cycle to prevent consequences in the future. I really recommend viewing statement reviews as an opportunity to clean up your reporting and to address any errors as soon as they occur and well before the audit process begins. After election day, that's when the post-election audit begins, right? Win or lose, every candidate registered with the CFB during the 2021 election cycle who made the primary and/or general ballot will receive a post-election audit. And the CFB audit unit will review the entire period your committee was active to verify compliance. Your response to your audit essentially determines if any penalties are assessed against your campaign. So you really want to make sure that this is why keeping such neat, organized, diligent documentation throughout the election cycle is so important, because we do look at all of this documentation during the post-election audit process. Your committee must maintain all campaign records for at least 6 years following the election. So make sure that right after election day, you will need to keep all of your election records for up to 6 years after that day. So with that, we do want to leave you today with another review of CFB resources. We know that there's a lot to compliance. You'll certainly learn a lot more about it throughout the election cycle. And definitely if you attend the compliance training. So we know that it's a lot, but we want you to know that there are resources that are available to help you and your campaign. But before we get into that, I quickly want to do a quick pause. Are there any questions at this time? Great, thank you, Kyle, for answering these questions. I know that we've gotten a couple, okay. I'm gonna take a quick pause here. We're doing really well on time just to see if people are still typing any questions. Okay, great. So with that, let's go ahead and review some resources that are going to be available to you, your campaign, after today's training, and definitely throughout the election cycle. So first, at the very start, is the Getting Started pamphlet. This is a pamphlet that if you've ever come to our offices while we were still working at our offices and just asked for information, this is a pamphlet that we would share with you. We're also going to attach this pamphlet to the thank you email that you will receive after today's training. And it's basically an informational guide that walks you through the steps to open your committee. So those 3 steps we mentioned before: obtaining an EIN from the IRS, opening your committee's bank account, giving us a certification or file registration. It will walk you through the steps to open your committee, and then it will also include a brief introduction of the campaign finance program. Next, we have the handbook. I think the handbook is one of the best resources that we have. It's a general reference guide and provides plain language explanations of the Act and board rules. You're welcome to read the Campaign Finance Act and the CFP board rules, but the handbook might be a lot friendlier and easier to digest. The handbook follows a candidate and treasurer's interaction with the CFP from the start of the election cycle to post-election compliance measures. So it also includes examples of documentations and forms, such as the contribution cards that I mentioned earlier. The handbook can also answer many of your questions, and we recommend that you read it entirely at least once, especially if you're a candidate and treasurer, if not multiple times. Okay, the electronic version of the handbook is always available on our website. So the Candidate Services tab on the homepage, you can find the campaign resources that include electronically fillable forms and templates, guidance documents that go into greater detail on more complicated compliance subjects as well. And additionally, the CFP website also has the Follow the Money database and the CFP campaign finance summaries, which contains all of the campaign finance information for all candidates, contributors, and independent expenditures for all election cycles. This is also, when you go into our website, this is also where you can sign up for additional trainings. You will see trainings for both compliance and CSMART, and you will see trainings that for different election cycles as well. As I mentioned earlier, we do have special elections going on. So make sure that if you are signing up for a training, that you sign up for a training in the proper election cycle that you are running in. Next, I want to talk quickly about C-Access. So C-Access is the candidates and treasurers online portal to CFP notifications and messages. So when you register with the CFP, you will receive your own username and password to your own campaign C-Access account. So note that you do have to register with us first in order to gain access to C-Access. Access is also the only way that you can log into C-Smart, which is our campaign finance software. So C-Smart is a web-based program which you will use to enter all of your campaign's transactions, including all contribution and expenditure details, such as contributors, vendors, amount, dates, etc. It's also where you will generate and submit your disclosure statements to the CFB. So C-Smart is what you will use in order to submit your disclosures to us. The mandatory C-Smart training is available on our website, and it is a thorough training starting from that goes through reviewing all of C-Smart's different functions, and it also teaches you how to enter different types of transactions into C-Smart, and also takes you through a disclosure statement filing. So definitely anyone on your campaign that's involved in compliance, that's involved in the finance aspect of your campaign, or doing data entry, we definitely recommend that they attend both the compliance and C-Smart training. And finally, Candidate Services is the unit of the CFB devoted to helping candidates, treasurers, and other campaign employees comply with the ACT and board rules. Each candidate is assigned a Candidate Services liaison who is there to help you and is available by email or by appointment to answer all of your questions. So definitely feel free to contact us at candidateservices@nyccfb.info. We are working remotely at this time, so email is the best way to reach us. Definitely, if you have any questions after today's training, throughout the election cycle and during your campaign, make sure that you reach out to us promptly. So with that concludes today's New to the CFB seminar. I'll be here, both Kyle and I will be here in an additional couple of minutes to answer any questions that you have. And don't forget that if you or your candidate is running for New York City office, go ahead and register to attend both the compliance and C-Smart trainings. And with that, I just want to say thank you to Kyle, to the rest of the CFB staff on our end for today's training, but also thank you to the Asian American Federation for hosting us and giving us this platform to share this information. And with that, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions that you may have for today's sessions for us. But otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and thank you for attending today's training.
Okay, so I don't see any questions coming in. I just want to say thanks, Saprita, for giving us an excellent presentation, and thank you, Kyle, for answering questions in the Q&A. Special thank you as well to Hannah and Dan for helping to bring the training to our audience. I hope you all feel more knowledgeable in planning and running your campaign. And perhaps equally important, I hope you feel more confident about your campaign plans or progress. The CFB staff are incredibly helpful. And while these campaigns are complex, liaisons like Saprita and Kyle make the process much easier. So be on the lookout for an email from the CFB with additional resources, as well as an email from AAF linked to a recording of this training and a follow-up survey. Thank you all for attending and have a great rest of your day.